China has the fastest and largest high-speed rail network in the world. The country has more than 19,000 miles of high-speed rail, the vast majority of which was built in the last decade. Japan's bullet trains can reach speeds of almost 200 miles per hour and date back to the 1960s. They've become a staple for domestic travel and have moved more than 9 billion people without a single passenger casualty. France began service of the high-speed TGV train in 1981, and the rest of Europe quickly followed. And high-speed rail is quickly expanding all over the world, in places like India, Saudi Arabia, Russia, Iran, and Morocco. And then there's the US. The US used to be one of the world's global leaders in rail, but after World War II, there was a massive shift.
If you look at the United States prior to 1945, we had a very extensive rail system everywhere. It all was working great, except the number of companies in the auto and oil industries decided that for them to have a prosperous future, they really needed to basically help phase out all the rail and get us all into cars.
The inflexible rails, permanently embedded in cobblestones, were paved over to provide smooth, comfortable transportation via diesel motor coach.
General Motors, Firestone Tire, Standard Oil, and a few other companies that got together, and they were able to buy up all the nation's streetcar systems and then quickly start phasing out service and literally dismantling all the systems over about a 10-year span.
In the 1950s, President Dwight Eisenhower signed a bill to create the National Interstate System. It allocated about $25 billion to build 41,000 miles of highways. The federal government paid for 90% of that, the states covered the final 10%, and rail fell by the wayside.
Can't you see that this highway means a whole new way of life for the children? And a way of life that we have a chance to help plan and to build.
We dedicated a huge amount of dollars to building automobile infrastructure in the middle of the 20th century, and we're still kind of attached to that model of development.
We've become a car culture, and it's hard to break out of that cycle. Not to mention the fact that in our political system, we have very powerful oil lobbies, car manufacturing lobbies, aviation lobbies, all the entities that the high-speed rail would have to compete with.
This is the American dream of freedom on wheels.
But according to some, this country's transportation ecosystem is reaching a tipping point.
When you look at what's happening with the corridor development, again, states across the U.S. who are recognizing they are running out of space to expand their highways or interstates. There are limits at airports. There's aviation congestion. So what are the options?
A better rail system is one and could come with significant benefits.
It's largely an environmental good to switch from air traffic and car traffic to electrified high-speed rail.
Where rail exists and it's convenient and high speed, it's very popular. America, I think, is waking up to this idea that rail is a good investment for transportation infrastructure.
Right now, the main passenger rail option in the U.S. is Amtrak. It's operated as a for-profit company, but the federal government is its majority stakeholder. Train systems reaching top speeds of over 110 to 150 miles per hour are generally considered high speed. And only one of Amtrak's lines could be considered as such. That's its Acela line in the Northeast Corridor running between D.C., New York, and Boston. And while the Acela line can reach up to 150 miles per hour, it only does so for 34 miles of its 457-mile span. Its average speed between New York and Boston is about 65 miles per hour, which is in stark contrast to China's dedicated high-speed rail system, which regularly travels at over 200 miles per hour. But some people are trying to fix that. In 2008, California voted yes on high-speed rail. Now, a decade later, construction is underway in the Central Valley of the state. And right now, it is the only truly high-speed rail system under construction in the U.S.
Ultimately, high-speed rail is a 520-mile project that links San Francisco to Los Angeles and Anaheim. That's phase one. And it's a project that's being built in building blocks. So the one behind me is the largest building block that we're starting with, this 119-mile segment.
This segment will run from Bakersfield to Merced. Eventually, the plan is to build a line from San Francisco to Anaheim, just south of LA. But as it stands, the state is almost $50 billion short of what it needs to actually do that.
The current project, as planned, would cost too much and respectfully take too long. There's been too little oversight and not enough transparency. We do have the capacity to complete a high-speed rail link between Merced and Bakersfield.
To complete the entire line as planned, the official estimate is now over $77 billion, and it's unclear where the money will come from. So why is it so expensive?
China is the place that many folks compare. So how have they been able to do it so quickly? And part of it is that the state owns the land. They don't have private property rights like we have in the US. You don't have the regulations we have in terms of labor laws and environmental regulations that add to costs. It also delays the projects.
The bottom line is we're really bad at just building things cheaply and quickly in the US in general.
So it's not just rail infrastructure that is expensive. All transportation infrastructure is.
The big reason why America is behind on high-speed rail is primarily money. We don't commit the dollars needed to build these systems. It's really as simple as that. And it's largely a political issue. They don't have political leaders who really want to dedicate the dollars needed.
Some of the earliest support for rail came from the Nixon administration. Some of the original capital subsidies and operating subsidies for urban transit came from the Republican parties. I think it's only more recently that maybe this has shifted, that more liberal-leaning folks who care about climate and a whole host of urban issues have really argued for investing very heavily in rail.
I think it's mostly ideological. They're big on highways. They're big on things like toll roads. They don't want the government spending dollars on this kind of project, and they see it as something those socialist European countries do, but not something that should be done in car-loving America.
This is why some high-speed rail projects are trying to avoid public funding altogether. One company, Texas Central, plans to build a bullet train from Houston to Dallas without using a dime of taxpayer money.
We're taking what is a laborious, unreliable 4-hour drive, if you're lucky, and turning that into a reliable, safe 90 minutes.
The Texas project is backed by investors motivated to make a profit and will use proven Japanese rail technology. Texas Central's goal is to complete the project by 2025. Another private company is even further along with its rail system in Florida. It's expanding its higher speed train from Miami to Orlando.
Orlando is the most heavily visited city of the United States. Miami, the most heavily visited international city of the United States. It's too far to drive, it's too short to fly. We had the rail link, and that was really the genesis of the project.
Wes Edens has invested heavily in Florida's rail project, which used to be called Brightline. Brightline recently rebranded to Virgin Trains as the company partnered with Richard Branson's Virgin Group.
The team at Brightline, which is now called Virgin Trains, has proven that it can work, that people actually want to get out of their cars and they'd love to be on trains.
In order to reach profitability, the company sacrificed speed to save money.
If you want to really go high speed, you have to grade separate. So you basically have to build a bridge for 250 miles that you then put a train on. That sounds hard and it sounds expensive, and it's both of those things. So a huge difference in cost, a huge difference in time to build, and not that much of a reduction in service.
So is the private sector the answer to bringing high-speed rail to the U.S.?
The private sector still has to operate with the oversight and the regulatory responsibilities of the public sector. So, for example, environmental review doesn't go away just because it's a private sector project. Labor standards don't go away. The difference is that they don't have to keep trying to sell a project to the public for a vote to raise taxes or sell bonds.
Some people remain optimistic that the U.S. can catch up to the rest of the world and have a robust, high-speed rail system.
We're building that right now behind us. So it's not only do I believe, but it's under construction.
There's broad consensus with our policy leaders in industry that it's time to move an infrastructure bill, and that will certainly help kickstart U.S. rail.
Others are much less confident.
I wish I were a little more optimistic. It's just very difficult to make the economics work here.
I don't see us catching up to where the rest of the world is. It would take such a massive infusion of dollars.
My own instincts are that it's going to be decades and decades and decades before you'll be able to go a one-seat trip from San Diego to Sacramento or San Francisco. It'd be nice if there was just one simple answer. It's this litany of factors that collectively add up that make this so hard to pull off in the United States.